Do you know that Public Supermarket is the largest employee-owned company in USA, with employees owning as much as 80% and the founders only 20% of the shares? I guess being an employee has never been this cool before. And this is because of the magic called as the Employee Stock Option Plan. And that's the topic for the day today. Here we will discuss all about employee stock options or ESOPs, how it works, why companies actually give ESOPs, and much more. Hi all, my name is Dheeraj from wallstreetmojo.com, the home for the most authentic place to learn finance and accounting. Let's get started. So what are ESOPs? ESOPs is actually a kind of an employee benefit plan where companies encourage their employees to acquire stocks or the so-called ownership in the company. So under this ESOP plans, an employee can actually purchase the company's share at a very low predetermined price. That's called as a strike price, and which he or she can then sell for a profit after a fixed tenure set by the employers. And that's called as a vesting period. Okay, so now that we know what ESOPs is, let's look at how this whole ESOPs thing works. But first, let us look at some of the terms that you need to know in order to understand this process thoroughly. The first is grant date. It is the date of the agreement between the employer and the employee, informing the employee that he or she is actually eligible for the ESOPs plan. Next is the vesting date. It is the date the employee is entitled to buy the shares after the conditions are actually met. Next is vesting period. It is the time period between the grant date and the vesting date. And finally, we have the exercise date. It is the date on which an employee exercises the options. Okay, now let's move on with the ESOPs process. So the process actually starts with the company setting up something called an ESOPs trust that generally holds the shares for the employees. Next, the trust receives funds from the company, or in some cases, from outside sources such as banks. So now that the money is with the trust buys a part or all of the shares from the company's owners. So once the shares are brought in, the company starts to allocate the shares to the employees through something called as a grant letter. That's based on pay, salary levels, years of services, etc. And the employees can actually choose the kind of vesting options that suits their need. So the vesting period generally lasts for 3 years to 6 years, depending on the specific terms and conditions that the employees have actually agreed upon. So imagine that once that, let's say, the vesting period is over, the employee has an option to sell their stocks to the company at the fair market price, and they can basically cash out. So it's a very happy affair for everybody that's involved here. Okay, so moving on, let's find out why do companies offer ESOPs and what benefits can the employees reap from it. Let's find out. Let's first look at the benefits from company's point of view. So ESOPs help the company to attract top talents and retain them for a longer period of time, helping basically the overall productivity. After all, who wouldn't want a piece of the stock, right, in their pocket? Then second is that there are certain tax exemptions and tax deductions that companies get due to offering ESOPs to employees. In fact, some of the companies also use ESOPs as a financial planning tool to basically pay off their debt by selling ESOP stocks. Now, from employees' point of view, the ESOPs actually help in boosting their private wealth, right, by offering added incentives or compensation. Another advantage is that it makes employees feel that they actually belong and they have a say in basically, kind of a decision-making opportunities. And this leads to more job satisfaction and security. Now, let's look at some of the questions that surround ESOPs. The first question, as a company, how much should be the ESOPs pool? 1%, 5%, 50%, or even more? Now, there's no fixed answer to this question actually. There are companies, who have dished out only a mere 5%, and then there are companies who have given a whooping, 100% in ESOPs. And all this actually depends on the importance and the role of founders of the company. Like, say, for example, if the founders are extremely important to the company and the employees are generally just taking care of the backroom jobs, think of admin, operations, etc. In that case, employees will only get a small fraction of the ownership through ESOPs. However, in cases where founders are not that important when it comes to execution, or let's say they want to just take a back seat altogether, in that case, employees can actually have a larger piece of the company's ownership through ESOPs. Now, another question that pops out is basically what happens to ESOPs if the company is acquired or bought by another entity? So in this case, what happens is the ESOPs will actually vest immediately. Now, this means that employees who actually own ESOPs would be able to exercise that ESOPs at that specific point in time. However, you should remember this, that if the companies actually are unable to deliver or succeed or not able to perform, none of these options will actually vest and employees would not get anything out of it. Another important event is when an employee, let's say, who is holding these ESOPs decides to quit, or let's say he is fired. Now, if the employee has quit, then in that case, the employee can only cash in those options that have been vested and will have to abandon those that have not been vested yet. However, let's say if the employee is fired, now in that case, this ESOP agreement would define the fate of options. This ESOP agreements usually would mention the terms and conditions, including what will happen to options when the employee is fired. Does he get the unvested options or not? So after answering the two questions that we just did, naturally, you would be inclined to ask, what is the right time to exercise your stock options? So when it comes to the right time to exercise your stock options, that would only be logical, of course, when the stock price is greater than the grant price or the strike price, right, that you were offered. So in the case of listed stocks, the stock price can be tracked easily. However, in the case of private company, the best time could be when the company actually goes for an IPO, or if there is a liquidity event in the case of mergers or acquisitions. Another question that people generally ask in the field of ESOPs is, what about the tax benefits of ESOPs? Do employees get any tax benefits? So the good news actually is that ESOPs, if you're holding ESOPs, you don't have to pay any taxes on their stocks until you decide to cash out. It's only at the time of cash out that you are required to pay taxes. Now, coming to the final part of the video, are ESOPs worth it? Let's find out. So according to some CEOs, ESOPs can actually be a game changer when it comes to driving and motivating employees to perform at their peak. However, these stock options, are always linked with the share markets valuations. So there's always a risk factor involved due to the fluctuating nature of stock prices. So eventually it all depends on how the company and the employees, view the ESOP plans. Do they consider it as a risk or as an opportunity to grow? I hope you found this video to be useful. Please do like and share. And if you have any feedback or want to suggest a topic for any future video, then you may do so by writing about it in the comments section. Also, we come up with interesting videos on finance and accounting topics regularly. So if you haven't subscribed to our channel yet, then please do so by clicking on the subscribe button below so that you can get the notification about our latest videos as soon as we release one. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.